Monday, April 1st, 1912. In Belfast, Ireland, in the early morning hours of that Monday morning, the mighty new liner Titanic sat, waiting to begin her formal acceptance trials. The papers that morning ran with the headline, "The departure of the Titanic leaves for Southampton this morning." It was said that she would leave Belfast for Southampton at 11 a.m. In the end, however, she would not. It had been a busy week for the Belfast shipbuilding firm Harland & Wolff. Since Titanic's launch the previous May 31st, her older sister Olympic had needed to return to the nest for repairs on 2 occasions. The first incident had come in September 1911, when an Admiralty cruiser, HMS Hawk, had ventured a little too close to Olympic in the Solent and had been drawn into a collision with the liner. The warship's reinforced concrete prow, designed to sink other vessels by ramming them, had scythed into Olympic's starboard aft quarter, creating incredible damage but, happily, not causing any serious injuries or fatalities. Olympic limped back to Belfast for repairs, arriving on October 6th and being dry docked on October 10th. As the water drained away and the full extent of the damage was revealed, White Star and Harland & Wolff conferred. The next day, Titanic's maiden voyage was announced to be postponed from March 20th to April 10th, 1912. Repairs to Olympic were completed, and she left Belfast again on November 20th, 1911. Work on Titanic had progressed steadily over the winter months. On February 14th, 1912, a note on her plans recorded a decision to add a bulkhead with a door and window on the forward end of Titanic's A-deck promenade. This note likely corresponds to the decision to enclose the forward half of Titanic's promenade with screens or windows. But even as late as March 8th, none of the screens were yet in place. Meanwhile, Olympic had thrown one more monkey wrench into things. After losing a propeller blade at sea on February 24th, Olympic arrived back in Belfast on March 1st to have her propeller replaced. She was dry docked on the morning of March 2nd, and by the morning of March 4th, she was removed from the dry dock. However, a strong storm with high winds forced her back into the dry dock where she stayed overnight. The weather had remained bad on March 5th, and Olympic stayed stubbornly, but safely, in place. It hadn't been until March 6th that she could be floated out. She finally left on March 8th to resume her itinerary, and Titanic went back to the fitting out wharf that same day. By any measure, finishing Titanic in time for her maiden voyage, already a Herculean task considering the ship's size and her many fittings and luxurious appointments, was really going to be a close thing. Nor was Titanic Harland & Wolff's only project. On Thursday, March 28th, the new cross-channel steamer Patriotic left Belfast on her trials. The 335-foot vessel was designed as a cross-channel ship for the Belfast to Liverpool route for the Belfast Steamship Company Limited. With the ship having completed her trials successfully, a luncheon was held in Patriotic's dining saloon while the vessel was anchored under the shelter of the County Antrim coast in the vicinity of Blackhead at the entrance to the Belfast Lock. A delegation from Harland & Wolff, including 2 of the firm's managing directors, J.W. Kempster and Thomas Andrews, were aboard for the festivities. During the traditional round of toasts made at such events, a toast was proposed in honor of Mr. Andrews. It was said that the toast was heartily honored. Andrews responded, saying that he was very sorry that Lord Peary himself could not be present for the event, as otherwise, the duty with which he had been entrusted would have been in much abler hands. He did say that he was glad, however, in acknowledging their kind remarks, to say that the prosperity of Harlan and Wolff had never been greater than it was at present. Suffice to say, he said, the firm was then employing over 15,000 men, and the total wages bill on the preceding Friday evening had been a record £27,500. A good deal of this bill, he teased, had been involved in the completion of the 2 first-class passenger ships they'd been working on, Patriotic and Titanic. As the group laughed over his joke, Andrews added another, saying that it had been a heavy task for the firm to complete the 2 ships in 1 week. With typical largesse, however, Andrews said that he would be misrepresenting the firm's attitude if he were to claim all the credit for Patriotic. He ended his speech by saying that it was rare for Harlan and Wolff to build Belfast ships for Belfast ship owners, but that he hoped there would be much more of such collaborations in the future. He then thanked everyone for accepting the invitations to be present that day. On Saturday, March 30th, a number of the guests who had been invited to see Patriotic's trial trip had taken an opportunity to inspect Titanic. Even though she was still incomplete, it was said that the visitors were afforded every possible facility in their tour through the huge vessel, and that they were deeply impressed by the immense size of the Titanic, which certainly justified her name, as well as by the excellence of the accommodation for all classes of passengers. The visitors seemed particularly enthralled with the special suites of first-class staterooms, 2 of which featured private promenade spaces. The press said, "The Titanic will maintain the reputation of Belfast in regard to shipbuilding, and the citizens generally will follow her career with sympathetic interest and the best of good wishes." Titanic's officer corps had arrived in 2 stages. The senior officers on March 20th, and at noon on Wednesday, March 27th, the ship's 4 junior officers had arrived. Chief Surgeon William "Billy" O'Loughlin, an Irish native from Tralee, boarded on March 24th, fresh from Olympic. Either he or another famed White Star ship surgeon, J.C.H. Beaumont, really could have ended up taking the post. However, it had been O'Loughlin who had complained to Captain Smith that he was tired of changing from one ship to another at this stage in his life. Captain Smith chided O'Loughlin for being lazy, and then told him to pack up and come with him to Titanic. In the end, Beaumont would take O'Loughlin's place on Olympic. Speaking of skippers, a carefully choreographed ballet of commanders was in the process of playing out. 62-year-old Captain Edward John Smith, White Star's senior captain, had been selected to take Titanic to the United States on her maiden voyage. Smith was then in command of Olympic. Another veteran White Star commander, Herbert J. Haddock, took formal command of Titanic on March 25, 1912 in Belfast. Haddock's last liner had been Oceanic, which he had commanded since April 1907, and he'd been assigned to replace Captain Smith in command of Olympic once Captain Smith left the older ship to take Titanic out on her trials. On Saturday, March 30th, 1912, Captain Smith had left Olympic in Southampton, having just brought the ship back from America. He raced up to Belfast, where he arrived on Monday morning, April 1st. Captain Haddock relinquished command to Captain Smith, and then hurried down to Southampton in time to take Olympic on her next westbound trip across the Atlantic, departing on Wednesday, April 3rd. By 4 a.m. that Monday morning, April 1st, the ship's firemen were on board and raising steam for the formal trials. Everything looked like it was a go, except for one vital detail: the weather. The winds coming out of the northwest were reportedly so high that it was decided not to risk bringing the monster Titanic out through the narrow channel. The decision was prudent, wise, and cautious, but it meant yet another delay before the ship was approved, certified, and could sail to Southampton, where a host of finishing touches needed to be done to get her ready for her maiden voyage. It was said that hundreds of spectators had turned out to the new deep-water wharf where Titanic sat, keen to see the ship leave. Although they were all disappointed when word came down that the trials had been delayed, it was also noted that they had the satisfaction of obtaining a good view of the vessel, which presented a magnificent spectacle. As everyone waited for the hours to pass on what was now a rather lazy April 1st, 1912, one question must have been in the back of everyone's minds. Would the weather moderate enough to allow Titanic to depart safely the next morning for her acceptance trials? Only time would tell. A special thank you to our supporters on Patreon: NikkiChan92, Evan Plemming, Lucas Sidlowski, Bluebird Nut, Mark Gegenheimer, Martin Cahill, Maximilian Metcalf, Rachel Warner-Sanchez, and Snow Monkey.